Right, if I may, we'll kick off with the presentation. What I'm going to do initially, if I may, just give a brief introduction to the presenters. First of all, we have Victoria, or Victoire, as it should be rightly pronounced. Victoire is policy officer. Sorry, bear with me here. I've got it. Here we go. Is policy officer in DG Move, the European Commission's Directorate General for Mobility and Transport. Victoria works in the team on sustainable and smart mobility, where she has been responsible for the last 5 years for topics related to multimodal transport, ticketing and information services. We've also got presenting Dr. John McCarthy. He leads Arab's European Intelligent Mobility Services, addressing sustainable digital transformation, data insight for client-led services, and bridging the gap between current and emerging technologies. There we go. So, if I may, can I hand the presentation over to Victoire?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction and also for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to share my slides, so it worked really well earlier. I hope it's going to be the same. Here we go. I think it's coming up. So indeed, as you explained, I work in DG Move in the European Commission, and I'm part of the team working on ITS, where I specialize on topics related to multimodal information service and ticketings. But today, the objective of my presentation is to give you an overview of the main aspect of the revision of our framework directive, which is the ITS Directive that was adopted in 2010 and that we just reviewed in 2023. So the revision is an amendment. If you have a look online on the website, you will see that on the 2023 text, you have actually to merge it with the 2010 text to make sense of it. And the objective, as I said today, is to provide you really an overview of the key changes and what you need to know going forward. So as I mentioned, the 2010 directive is really a framework. It gives us a backbone to support the development of ITS services in the EU in the field of road transport, but also for interfaces with other modes. That's why we have also specification on multimodal travel information service within the scope of the ITS directive. The objective, the general element is to ensure that we have interoperability of services and that you have services that can develop properly, which means that you need to have data accessible so that you can easily find them, but also that data needs to be created. In the amended ITS directive, one of the change is actually the priority areas. So the way the directive is constructed is you have different priority areas, which allows us then to develop delegated regulation specification for different type of services. So I was mentioning already multimodal travel information services. Those are part of priority area 1, for example, of the ITS directive. And what we just did last year with the revision is to clarify the priority area and is to rename those priority area. So you can see here on the screen that this gives us a roadmap. We will work on information and mobility ITS services beyond what we have already been doing. We have to work on travel, transport, traffic management ITS services. This is really relevant, for example, for enhanced traffic management services, and you will see that this is also part of our future work program. Road safety and security ITS services, we have already been doing a lot with the development of specification for this type of service, but there's still more to be done. And of course, CCAM, connected and automated mobility, and what we call CITS services. This is a priority area of itself as well, even though obviously you have link with road safety and security. So this is one of the change, just to rebrand, rename, facilitate the reading of the priority areas, which guide us to then develop specification. The second really important change with the revision of the directive, and I guess we'll spend a bit of time to discuss this also today, is that we changed the scope of the directive itself. Until now, the philosophy and the logic of the directive was that we could only mandate the accessibility of data. And by accessibility of data, it means the obligation to, when the data is digitalized, to make sure that this data can be found. Now, with the amendment, there is an additional obligation and a mandate to digitize information, to make data available, and to deploy services. So what you have here on this slide is the first part, is this new obligation with Article 6A, mandating the availability of data, which we list. You will see I have also put on the next slide the list of data, which we list it in an annex. And we have a stepwise approach in terms of the stringency of the obligation. So you have to respect a certain geographical scope, geographical coverage, but also you have certain deadlines to digitize information first on updates, on update of existing data. For example, if you have an update on traffic rules or circulation plans, and on top, another date to digitize all the stock of data. So you will see in the next slide actually that you have two different dates in this Annex 3. One date for the update and one date for the whole stock of data. This is just to have a gradual approach and is to be more also proportionate in the obligation that was imposed. Two important elements also, and I'm sure this might also be a question that you have, digital copies of data. So this obligation to create data only exists if you already have underlying information that exists. So in other words, there is no obligation to create new information. It's only if you have those traffic circulation plans or whatever data types you might think of that you have an obligation to digitize. No need to create new information. And another point that is also important for you in terms of the logic and how this will evolve, you will see that certain dates are missing, or also certain data types are missing, but the Commission has the right to update this Annex 3 with what we call a delegated regulation. And so it's basically a subset of the ITS Directive, but to do that, we first have to carry out a cost-benefit analysis to assess, of course, the cost for data holders in terms of the creation of these data types. And this is just an illustration. Okay, it's maybe a bit small, but it's just an illustration of Annex 3. You see 4 columns, and in the first column you have a description of the data type. In the second column, the geographical scope. The third column is the date by which the update needs to be digitized. And the fourth column is the date by which all the data stock needs to be digitized. Some dates are missing, not on this slide, but in the whole annex. And we need to work in the next 4 years in the work program on delegated act to add those dates. So this is for the first key new obligation of the ITS Directive. The second one that I was also already mentioning is an obligation to deploy certain services. And for now, this is limited to SRTI services, so safety-related information services, which are listed in the Annex 4 of the revised directive. And if we want to mandate the deployment of additional service, this time we can only do that by reviewing the whole directive. We cannot not have delegated regulation or subset of the directive. There needs to be a whole new discussion, co-decision procedure with member states, so a more heavy procedure to add additional type of services and to mandate this development. So just in a nutshell, this is a bit of a summary of the obligation of the 2010 directive and the amendment of 2023. As you understood, we request the availability of data, the digitization of data with this new obligation in Article 6 and Annex 3. The accessibility of data itself is already mandated in the scope of the current directive and the different delegated acts on safety-related travel information, on real-time travel information, multimodal travel information. And as you understood as well, now we also have a mandatory deployment of ITS services with the amendment and this Annex 4. So this is for the revision, the key elements of the revision. And I will now move on, and of course I will make a pause later on and take questions, but move on to the next steps for us, since we have revised this directive in terms of implementation and what we need to do to properly support the implementation of this directive. So here you have an overview of the different steps that we need to take and the different legal obligation as well that we have and that member states also jointly have with us. So first of all, member states have 24 months to transpose this directive. It's a directive, it's not a regulation, so it's not directly applicable. Member states have to transpose it into their national law. For this, we have been in the past actually closely working with member states to help them transpose. We plan to do the same. We have already prepared with our legal team an Excel sheet to properly explain article by article how to properly transpose to make sure that there's a common understanding across member states. And we have, of course, also a committee, the ITS committee, where we discuss possible issues of implementation. Beyond transposition, and to put things in action, specifically in terms of the work that we need to do in the context of a priority area, this is quite important. We have the obligation in the directive to work on a working program for 2024-2028. And this working program, I will present it a bit more in detail, is our roadmap in terms of the activities that we will conduct to support further the development of specific ITS services in the context, of course, of all these obligations of availability and accessibility of data. To help us do all of this, we also have the obligation to consult stakeholders, and we have renewed the ITS advisory group. We also ask member states to report on how they implement the legislation, and we had the obligation to have templates for reporting and templates for key performance indicators. Member states have to report 15 months after entry into force of the directive. You have a different deadline for digitalization. This will be important for us to check within the context of the member states report. And ourselves, the Commission, we need to provide a report to the Parliament and to the Council on how well things are going. Of course, we will rely very much on what member states tell us, both in the KPIs, but also in their own reporting. And finally, there is an obligation to review the directive in 2028 to assess if what we have done was efficient in terms of meeting the objective of interoperability and development of services based on availability of data. I will now detail a bit more each of the activities that you have here in bold and that might be interesting for you. So on the work program, on the advisory group, and on the templates and KPI for member states reporting. Starting with what I think is the most important element is the working program that we have to adopt in 12 months after the entry into force of the directive. So this is it's coming up quite soon. We have to actually adopt by December 2024. These are a bit the nitty-gritty, so we have to adopt by an implementing act, which means that member states, in the context of the ITS committee, they vote on this working program. We collaborate this working program with member states, so they are fully on board. And this is just the process, and it's just to explain to you that how we elaborate the work program. Firstly, as you can see, we had many meetings in Q1 2024 with member states. So we had, I think, 3 actually member states expert group meeting. Yes, 3 until June. We also had ad hoc consultation with key stakeholders. So we had a stakeholder workshop, for example, in March, and we consulted the ITS advisory group, where you only have private or NGOs, stakeholders represented. Then we will vote. We will vote actually in October on the working program. So member states vote on the working program before we adopt it fully in December. What is important for you to know, what is in this working program? The directive obliges to have elements on the data which are considered for Annex 3, but also all the key activities per priority area. So just to give you a bit of a taste, for example, priority area 1 on information services, we have already worked a lot on real-time traffic information services. We just revised this delegated act. We worked also on multimodal travel information service, but we need to do something additional on identifiers of access nodes because you have different ways of identifying it. This is a problem for service provider, hence the need to have a coordinated action. Also for priority area 3, for example, on security ITS services, the delegated acts are quite old, and we heard from stakeholders that this is a key priority and we need to revise this delegated regulation to make it up to speed to the needs of the sector. This is just an illustration also of the dates that are missing, and this is a key element also, of course, of the working program to add the missing dates. I was trying to explain also that are outlined in Annex 3. Again, happy to take additional questions on this working program. One thing that I haven't mentioned that is relevant for you is that it will be published in September online on the Have Your Say portal. I'm happy to share with you also the link when it's published, so you can have a look and you can also input on this working program before we vote in committee, before the member states vote on it in October. Going quite quickly because I'm a bit over time, I apologize for that, but we also, I was mentioning, have to consult stakeholders in a structured way with an advisory group. We renewed the decision and we had a call for actors who wanted to be part of this advisory group. We have 25 members, and if you want to have additional information on this advisory group, we have what we call in the Commission a public registry of experts, where we published all information about minutes, agenda of these meetings, so you have more detailed information. And recently we had a meeting with them to discuss the working program. Them are the following stakeholders. Actually, we summarized it in a slide. We have ITS service providers, manufacturing industry, mostly road, but also CIE cycling industry, professional organization, standardization organization, but also telecom with ethno, social partner, we have trade unions, cities with police, road infrastructure managers, of course, and transport operators for the multimodal part with rail operators, public transport operators with UITP and Transdev. And finally, I think this is the last point I want to highlight. In the work that we are doing, we have been also working closely with member states on reporting templates, which is super important for us to understand and assess how well the directive is implemented, put in place, and what are the challenges. Similarly, here you have on this slide a bit the nitty-gritty of the Commission, and we needed to adopt an implementing act where you have common templates for all member states. And this template is now mandatory. It used to be something that was optional. And beyond, we also have KPIs, some of which are also mandatory by certain dates. We have deployments, benefits, and financial KPIs on which member states need to report. And again, this will really help us assess how well we fulfill our objective in terms of general objective, interoperability, and deployment of services with this directive. This is just the time frame for the reporting template. They have been actually published by my colleague yesterday on the Have Your Say portal. So when we discuss, I can also share in the chat the link, so you can actually have a look already at those reporting templates. And again, we will vote on them with member states in September in the context of the ITS committee. The last point I wanted to share with you is maybe a more general point. It's all of these are, of course, very specific legal obligation and how we work with member states to comply our obligation, but also to make sure that from their side they do as well. But there's also support in place with the NAPCOR project, and I'm not sure to which extent all of you are familiar with this project. It's a project that's funded by CEF, so it's Connecting Europe Facility. It's an EU program to support implementation of transport and mobility activities. And in this NAPCOR project, basically, we're bringing together all member states, but also you can see that we have an advisory board of stakeholders. And basically, the idea is to help member states implement and specifically support them with the development of their national access points. It's true that I haven't mentioned it. I should have mentioned it before. But for the accessibility of data, we mandated with a delegated act the development of national access points. And there's many questions at play in terms of the quality of the data, metadata, of course, many questions related to standards across modes, but also for specific modes. And all of this is being addressed by this NAPCOR project to see how we can further align, harmonize, but also respond to very technical questions. The project is actually coming to an end, but it has been, in our view, very successful, also in helping us assess accessibility of data on the NAP, so really try to see what has been done. And we are currently working on terms of reference to relaunch a second version of the project, and also to potentially extend it a bit more to multimodal aspect, which were not fully covered up till now in NAPCOR. I realize it's a lot of information. I tried to do my best to summarize it. I hope it was clear, but that was in a nutshell what I have to share for today, and happy to take questions and continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Victoire. That's greatly appreciated. If I may, if we can maybe continue with John and take questions at the end so we know what time we've got. Dr. John McCarthy, he really is just going to give what this directive means from an Irish context. So if I can hand it over to you, John, please.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds, Adrian, and I will bring my slides on onto the screen. Oh.
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. All right. And thanks very much. Thanks very much, Victoire, as well. I think a huge amount of information, a huge amount of useful information. So it's fantastic to get that from someone that's actively involved in this space. What I will try and do is not overlap too much with what Victoire has alluded to, but try and land it in some of the areas where Ireland will need to consider in terms of data and digital services. And I think those two terms resonated for me in terms of what Victoire spoke about in terms of the digital services and data and standardization. A summary, well, I've tried to summarize all of what Victoire has done, not using her slides, but putting my view on it in terms of the implication on data. The ITS Directive puts a huge requirement on, as Victoire has alluded to, the availability of data and that mindset and a cultural and technical change to a digital capability for the actors in our industry to engage. An important point as well is that there isn't no new infrastructure needed, but where data exists, it has to be shared in a standardized way. There's the development and the importance of understanding static and dynamic data, the impact that that has have on our network, the ability then to share that information, and understanding, I suppose, from an Irish perspective, what do we have right now in terms of alignment with the ITS Directive as it will be once it's voted upon, and then what needs to be done, so the to-be state. And then the stakeholder engagement, and I have one or two slides related to the NAP and what that requires also. So I suppose, summarizing again in my own words, what I've heard and from the work that we've done in terms of reviewing the publications to date is that data from organizations have to be available where it's already in use. There's a push for the capability of static and dynamic and real-time creation. The NAP, and the next slide just talks about the NAP, is going to play an integral role in the what I'm framing as the digital ecosystem to support the ITS Directive. Standards in terms of how the actors engage with each other in the sharing of data, and to make sure that it's done in an interoperable and continuous way and compatible across the different groups involved, and that specifications are adhered to at all times to make sure that the data is being used in a sensible way. In terms of the ITS Directive, the preamble associated with that mentions a number of key elements, and one is, as has been mentioned now a few times, is around the NAP. There is a NAP in place in Ireland. The impact here, though, is what needs to change to support the fundamental shift of the ITS Directive around that digital domain and the capability to deliver digital services. In line with that is the need to create a data governance approach around the sharing of data and the schemas that are going to be used, the APIs that will be typically enacted for the sharing of data, and that goes across the different domains of our industry, whether it's electric vehicles, transportation data. The NAP is going to play a key role, and specs of the API is going to be a part of that. Test environment in terms of fostering innovation is something that we need to consider, and also the creation of knowledge groups, potentially through ITS Ireland, in terms of engaging with the ITS Directive in understanding from a bottom-up approach what the implication will be across city levels, organizational levels, and then at a national level, and data availability across the whole network, linking in, as an example here, the TII data lake, the operational architecture, how does that feed in? As an example, the city organizations, how do they handle their data? How do they ingest and share data out to the NAP going forward, linked into the requirements of the ITS Directive, and also, say, from a departmental perspective, how are we going to ensure that we have a cohesive national capability to address the ITS Directive, and also the ownership in terms of governance associated with the different elements? And then protection of our personal and private data, as we do to date, with a greater need. Well, I think that the need is the same, but a greater shining the light on the importance of that. And then the governing procedures associated with the implication at specifications for ITS and also for CITS, connected vehicles, and the data sharing and the integration of the NAP with that as part of the services that could be created and consumed by the individuals and by the organization. So I'm going to take a number of discrete points that are laid out in a number of different sections within the documents as they stand at the minute, for us to get a better feel for it. And then at the end, I'm going to present a table where I've tried to summarize what I presented to you in a concise fashion so that we can really land into reality. The NAP is providing discovery services, and for it to provide discovery services, it has to be fit for purpose. And Victoire mentioned, the work that NAPCOR has been doing to ensure that there's going to be consistency of approach, and also understanding the importance of the metadata. And metadata, if we think about it as signposting for the different data sets that are being created, so that we can follow those signposts of data from origin to destination across the NAP to then link them into digital services, is an important point. Jumping on to the next slide. The specific types of data, and it's called out in terms of reliable traffic information around traffic safety, the regulation, restrictions, and road or lane closures should be made available. So that puts a requirement for us to consider where road closures are taking place, the mechanisms that we're handling the data associated with those planned closures and unplanned closures. How is that linked into the ITS Directive, and then how is that shared at a local level and then integrated with the NAP? So we need to understand the different data sets and systems linked into these different areas around regulations, restrictions, and closures, and how we can integrate that through the requirements of the ITS Directive and then linking it into the NAP. By doing that, we also have to consider the accessibility of the data and the standardization. So where data is being shared, that we have access to that data. I use the example here of roadworks closures as well, so that there isn't a black box system in place where we can't get the outputs. If we have data already in the ecosystem, we have to be able to align it with the ITS Directive, and a harmonization around the real-time traffic information services, linking in the existing infrastructure where data is already being captured but maybe not shared. There's an implication here that we have to consider the sharing of data, and what does that mean in terms of the infrastructure that's already in place, rather than looking to deploy new infrastructure. I will also mention at the end the multimodal activities and directive, multimodal information directive, and the implications on data that has as well, particularly at the integration of different data sets. Implication number 3, and I think it's 4 in total, and then I do a summarized slide. So not much else to digest. So please hang in there, because it is quite detailed. But the accessibility of accurate, up-to-date data, from a road authority, from a road operator, from a city management perspective, we have to understand what data we're already generating across the data chain, from physical infrastructure to data management systems, what data will have to be shared, and then the storage and the quality controls that we put in place associated with data to allow us to exploit the value of the metadata that's linked into it, that signposting, but also, I suppose, from a practical perspective, the cost management associated with hosting and data, governance of data, and then distribution of data. And NAP and the work that NAPCOR have been involved in will help guide us in that. The reuse of data around the discoverability and the accessibility of data is going to be important as well. So if we have a traffic technology deployment, a system that's on the street linking into a traffic management system, there's data being generated, it's associated with some of the key points around, say, static or dynamic data that we will expect to be made available through the ITS Directive implications via the NAP, then we have to make sure that there's accessibility in place, but also that's linked into governance and safety of the data as well across the system. So there's multiple points of risks and resilience and failures that have to be established across the digital ecosystem to ensure that we're adhering to the ITS Directive, and also ensuring that the organizations who are sharing that data are not exposed in an undue fashion. And then in terms of the member states, regrouping public and private access points in a single point, and Victoire might come in at the end in terms of that point, and the possibility of a lighthouse European NAP entity that's going to guide the member states. It'd be interesting, a question I have for you, Victoire. Final implication here is in terms of, again, adhering into point 17, the description of the data, the implication, the importance of the signposting, and making sure that from state to state, the metadata approach is standardized and consistent with an agreed specification to make sure that our data is equivalent, when I say our Irish data is equivalent and transposable at a European level. And a key point here as well that Victoire mentioned as well, we're not looking to impose extra implications on the data if it's not already being recorded or being captured, but it is, then it has to be made sure that machine readable going forward. And the final point there, point 21, is around common definitions. As I mentioned, data quality, completeness, accuracy, and up-to-dateness of the data. And why that is important is to make sure that our adherence to the ITS Directive and the work that we do is aligned with our European partners, so that we can share data and have knowledge transfer and capability and skill generation at a national perspective linked into what's been done at a European level. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that in terms of development of services linked into data, coming across data sets shared across different nations within the European family. Trying to summarize those activities and linking it into some of the dates that are stated at present, and the consideration, I suppose, if I go to the commons piece, trying to link in what does Ireland need to consider is around the creation of static maps around the data traffic regulations, linking it into access conditions. Dynamic information of speed, where we're doing it already, must be made available, and then that has an implication on the timeliness and the real-time accessibility of that data through the interfaces, and then dynamic direction of travel in terms of the physical operating points. In terms of traffic circulation plans, not mandatory to create, but considering where we have them in existence and making them available, also looking at the value in considering if we are not doing at present, how do we go about creating those circulation plans, because they will have value in terms of the customer services that can be generated to ensure consistent journey time reliability and information engagement and exchange with the traveling public. And then permanent access restrictions linked into this dynamic data sets, and how do we do that in a sensible way, and creating maps. And maps are visual representation. So underpinning the map is the data system that will be managing that. So the real-time information here in terms of road closures is to be managed potentially through a traffic data management system that allows integration with the NAP, accessibility of a number of data systems to be put into place. Important in all of this, though, is, if I jump back and forward again, is around understanding the as-is across these three areas. So what is it that we're doing right now to allow us to move forward to adhere to the ITS Directive? So there's a number of gap analysis that will need to be done from a data perspective, understanding the data sets that are already in play, how governance is applied to that, the metadata that's linked into it. Those are the activities that will be needed to be undertaken. And then providing a cohesive approach into the NAP, and also, as an example here, the weather systems and that's linked into the temporary slippery road. As an example, the weather systems and the data that they're capturing, having them available, which is also an integration between private and public bodies potentially, and also could be linked into the contractual management of the data as to who's providing the data and how it all links in. Also, in terms of ANPR, the utilization of automated number plate recognition systems, accessing that data and then distributing that data in a way that isn't exposing any third parties or any traveling public members, but also aligned to the data on detected road safety related elements. And also, final point here is around travel data, multimodal static data. As an example here, accessibility for the Lewis, so undertaking activities to understand how that data set is being accessed at present, if not, and how does it linking in to the ITS Directive. So there's a huge discovery phase that needs to be undertaken as well in order to ascertain the current as-is state and then a mapping to the 2B. I won't let the opportunity go without, though, and slightly not directly linked in terms of it. The ITS Directive is not alone. There's significant activity taking place on multimodal traffic information services. And what does that mean? The implication here, again, is around data and the availability of data that is fit for purpose, that is standardized, that allows users and customers to take value from the different data sets. And I'll just jump quickly ahead in terms of what does that look like in terms of the data types, the mandating of dynamic data in terms of tariffs, location of vehicle under vehicle sharing programs, scooters, occupancy of vehicles, not mandatory, but a data set could be available. And then looking forward in terms of parking, onboard services and traffic delays, how is that information going to be captured? And I suppose you can look at this at a national level, but also at a city and regional level to ensure that that end-to-end journey planning and traffic management capability is in place, layered on top of the existing traffic management systems and the infrastructure that we have in play at the minute. And that's it. That's a super fast run through, and I thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. That was really interesting. Again, two excellent presentations from Victoire and yourself, John. Can I really just follow up now with any questions for any of the presenters, please?
Hi.
Sorry, go on, Karen, Maggie.
Hi. Yeah, is my hand up, is it? Or maybe it's not. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Thank you very much. Good to see everyone again. Yeah, it's a lot captured here. There's a few things just to help focus the scope. Now, digitized, I initially was like, what does the definition of digitized mean? And it seems to be that the NAP is the end point for the digitization with all the metadata behind that. Because people think I'm making my data available digitally is I'm putting up on a website in a Word format for everyone to read. You know, it's still a digitalization of it being available. So that clarification would be good to just really focus in on that. What does it mean to be digitized, to digitize our data? Because everyone has their own processes, as local authorities would have, in sharing information, either internally or externally in the group, but it's really common denominator, spreadsheets, words on a website, people have to manually access it, and it's not very interoperability. So it'd be good to see the different layers of that in order to meet this directive, you know, and what does it expect? The scope of us gathering all this information, because I would say that's a traffic management system, it would pick up traffic counts from the road, but that's an internal operation value for the system to work. So you could say, well, what can you share in a traffic management system that is, you know, that is actually for use for people to be shared, you know, because a lot of that is operational data for the system to work itself, like you would have any operational data for within the system in that place. But looking at it like, what is the purpose of the NAP, the purpose of sharing data? And I got the word of road safety was one. You know, like, you know, it was one of the words I think was in the directive, you know, so it's really just to focus on the purpose in sharing this data, because there's so much data to be shared. So why are we sharing it? And if it's road safety, you need to understand And the reason why I'm gathering this data is for the road safety in this element here. So that's just my 2 queries. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a. Does anybody want to respond to that there, John or Victoria?
I think if we have Victoire on the call, it will be important to hear from her in the first instance.
Yeah, I'm happy to try and answer. So just to clarify, firstly, in terms of digitalization, indeed, as you rightly said, there's different layers. So in the context of the directive, there is an obligation to digitize the information, so to create the data. This is the only obligation. But this is linked to another layer, which are the obligation of the delegated regulation, where you have an obligation to make this data accessible in specific standards, so to make sure that you have interoperability via the national access points, and you also have the obligation to create the national access points. So there's like 2 layers of obligation that are complementary. So I hope this answers your first point. And on the second point, on the purpose of sharing the data, again, what is really important is that the directive is an empty shell without the delegated regulation. And each delegated regulation is there to support the development of specific services, so safety-related traffic information. The purpose, of course, is to enhance road safety. So you share this data to help the development of services for road safety. Real-time traffic information. You share this data to help the development of this type of services. Multimodal traffic information, that's the same. E-call, and then we have also other delegated regulation on information for secure and safe parking trucks, and of course also potentially CITS. So that's really for the purpose. You have to look at the different specification helping the development of services. I hope I answered your question. I tried.
Thank you, Victoire. John, anything you want to add there?
No, I suppose just to emphasise, as Victoire was saying, the layers of the approach under the ITS Directive, there's that requirement that we are creating data that we're creating in a standardised fashion, and then linked into the delegated regulation is that the link into the NAP, and the NAP playing a very important part going forward.
Thanks, John. I had one question there. It really is, who else would be able to utilise this centralised data, either from a country point of view or a European perspective point of view? Will you allow, for example, private businesses to utilise that data for the good of travellers?
There's no limitation as to data users. And actually, so one thing that is also really important is you can attach commercial agreement to sharing this data. So data holder can say, this is my data, but you have to pay this fee. So you can attach a commercial agreement, but it cannot be discriminatory. So it has to be the same for all types of data user. This is specified in the delegated regulation. And of course, the purpose is that a service provider, private service provider, as many as possible, really, reuse this data. But we also have, for example, researchers, even within the Commission, working, for example, on accessibility of public transport, who use the data of the national access point. So it can be reused by them as well.
Grand. So am I right in thinking then, so data is going to be freely available to anybody, but we may have to pay for certain data from private areas to actually be shared?
It's not freely available. You can, as a data holder, attach a commercial condition. Okay. This is actually very specific, is what we do in the ITS world. And it's not what is done in other sectors of the Commission, where you have the Open Data Directive for public sector, where you have an obligation to share data freely. So it's actually a big specificity of the sector, that it's not fully for free.
Yeah, super that. Once again, I don't see any more hands up, but is anybody else who wants to ask a further question? Kieran. Kieran, you want to come in there?
I just had a bit of trouble unmuting myself there. That's very interesting on a bottom-up level of how we can share data. But I was just thinking that a lot of the data services we use in our UTMC systems and the likes of floating car data really come down to a very small number of pan-European companies. And I suppose it would be a good idea for maybe 1,000 cities in Europe to avoid paying them to develop these methods of putting data up to meet the obligations, when if they could be addressed in a Europe-wide sense, that could be an easier way to do it. Sorry, my kids have just come in.
If I understood correctly.
Yeah, so I think Kieran's asking there, really, rather than we pay many times from a single provider, to say we know a number of companies out there that provide urban traffic control systems, only a few companies, but across lots of regions. I think he's asking, can we set up something where we're not paying many times for data?
Sorry for the interruption there. I clarify my question. That's sort of where I'm getting at. These data companies that local authorities are using are pan-European companies, and there's not very many of them. So instead of a bottom-up approach, which of course a lot of the directive requires our participation in, there would be specific parts that a top-down approach might be a more economical way of doing things. And we wouldn't, like, say the UTMC software I'm using is also in Paris and Oslo and other cities. We want a single method of formalizing that data and getting it up and getting it available, and that would require a top-down approach. I don't know if that's something you've been looking at.
Can I just clarify with you? Well, what you're asking is in terms of cost of digitizing the data for authorities, right?
Not specifically cost, but I mean effort.
Efforts, yeah. Well, in terms of technical, but what I don't fully get is you're saying on the one hand the data holders are pan-European actors, but on the other hand you're talking about data holders as cities. So is it cities that digitize, or is it the cost for the efforts for cities, or the efforts for the big
cities
data
are
holders?
Customers of pan-European companies which provide data.
Yeah, and so it's the efforts for companies.
Yes. So if there's a standardized method set out for these companies across Europe, then the data could be available in a pan-European format much more quickly.
Yeah,
standardized.
So the standard is there, the pan-European formats are there. So this is why we say, the data has to be made accessible in one standard. Then I guess now the question that remains is a bit the question that John had earlier, is about one national access point or several national access points. And this is something we're actually working on to make sure that you can easily find info from one national access point to another. Which would simplify everyone's life, because if you're a big, air carrier, this is one data holder, indeed that they don't have to put their data in 5 different national access points. So this is something we're working on. I'm not sure I fully answered your question, but I hope so.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm just wary of time now, there's 3 minutes left. So first of all, can I thank both yourself, Victoria, and John for excellent presentations, and thank you for allowing us to record and share your slides. It's greatly appreciated. I'd like to say also a quick thanks to Justin Wallace, who represents the Department of Transport on the ITS Ireland board, for being the liaison between yourself, Victoria, and ITS Ireland. Just slightly looking forward, we've got a number of events coming up which I do need quick reactions to. The barbecue, specifically the barbecue in Dublin, is being held on the 10th of July. We've had very few requests to take part in that or attend, and we need to identify numbers. So again, please can you come back to us ASAP for the 10th of July, where the barbecue will be held at the Odeon in Harcourt, Dublin. The second event will be the second barbecue in Cork, which is the 22nd of August at the Crawford Arms. Again, we'll be sending out invitations for that very shortly. And finally, looking forward to the ITS Ireland Conference, which is taking place the 17th, 18th of October. And again, we talked about digitalisation in a big way today. The actual theme for the conference on the 17th, 18th of October is the digitisation of transport. The title being the digitisation of transport and infrastructure and the role of data. And as we can see in this particular presentation, data is paramount now for the future, and the ease of sharing of that. Apologies on behalf of our chair, David Leader Kemp. He's actually flying the flag for ITS Ireland over with ITS New Zealand, and has done a very well received presentation over there. And once again, we've had 25 people attending this, so thank you very much, everybody. And finally, my thanks to Dermot Woods for setting up this webinar. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks all. That was great.
Thanks for